Louisiana's economic reliance on oil and gas drilling is shifting. The price of oil has stabilized now at about $70 per barrel since falling to under $30 in 2016. But drilling activity in our state has not come back with the price. Kelly Spires is here now to tell us how the economy might be changing.
That's true, Andre. Drilling and production, that's called the upstream part of the oil and gas sector. At the same time that has fallen off, the downstream part of the sector, that's refining chemicals and energy exports, that's thrived.
When you think about the oil and gas sector, you probably picture derricks and deep water rigs, but that's not all there is.
The oil and gas industry that we think of today is very different than we might have thought of 10, 20, or 30 years ago, in that we've got a lot of employment in the refining, the chemicals, and the energy export. And that's a larger driver of employment than the upstream oil and gas production sector today.
Greg Upton is with the Center for Energy Studies at LSU. The upstream sector has traditionally played a larger role in the economy than the downstream. That's changing.
When you look over the past really 30, 40 years in Louisiana, upstream oil and gas production's actually been declining. It's been declining for a few reasons. First of all, people have been moving further and further offshore into federal waters. But also, of course, we've had this really large increase in production from shale geological formations.
So when the price fell out in 2014, that had huge consequences.
We were employing over 50,000 workers, and we lost about 20,000 of those workers in that drop.
But now the price has come back, but not the jobs.
We would have estimated that about 10,000 of those jobs would have come back by today. But actually, we unfortunately haven't seen that. We're still projecting over the next few years that we'll see some of that employment come back, but the rate at which that employment comes back is slower than what we thought even just a few years ago.
When you look at downstream production, it's a different story. That's the refining, the chemical industry, and the energy exports sector, liquefied natural gas primarily.
Again, if you go back about 10 years to about 2006, Louisiana had somewhere a little over 30,000 workers working in the refining and chemical sector. Over this last decade, that's increased consistently, almost year over year. And today, we actually employ more people in the refining and chemical and energy export than we do in the upstream oil and gas production part of the sector.
Part of the reason the downstream sector has done so well is also a reason for the upstream struggles. Natural gas drilling that is cheaper in other parts of the country than drilling in Louisiana.
We've had these huge increases in oil and gas production. That's driven down the price of both oil and natural gas. And that's been really good for the downstream part of the sector that use that as feedstocks in order to sell those products all over the world.
It all adds up to billions of dollars in investment.
Over the last 10 years or so, we've had about $60 billion in infrastructural investments in Louisiana. That's a really big number for a small state like Louisiana. And we've got another 90 billion or so of project announcements that are going to happen over the next few years.
Upton says one of the benefits of the shift from downstream to upstream employment is that because companies are putting in so much investment, they're likely to continually need workers.
Historically, when you look at the downstream sectors, the volatility in employment from year to year is lower than the upstream oil and gas extraction, which will move pretty significantly when there's a change in the price of oil and or natural gas.
However, there is a risk. We're exporting about 3 million barrels a day of different chemicals and petroleum-based products.
We're really opening ourselves up for our local business cycles to be driven by things that are happening all over the world. And in particular, when you have economic growth in the developing world, such as Asia and Africa, that could be really good for our local economy because it's driving demand for these products.
But when there's a global downturn or even trade spats, that can influence the local economy here in Louisiana. In the past, though, those fluctuations have been tied to the price of oil, as we've seen play out since the drop in 2014. So will a downstream heavy economy be less volatile than what we had?
If I had to make a guess of what's going to happen over the next decades today, I would say that hopefully that this transition to an export economy would lead to declines in the volatility for employment in the state. But that's an empirical question to be seen, and that's something we're going to be watching really closely.
Now, Upton did point out some light on the horizon for the drilling sector. There has been some initial activity in an oil formation or a play called the Austin Chalk that sweeps through central Louisiana.
All right, interesting. Kelly, thanks so much for that.